let's get into the overview effect. You mentioned
Sure.
it already. The metaphor of the overview effect is already built into the logo, so it seems to be a very central idea to your project. Can you tell the audience real quick just what the overview effect is and how it sort of influences your work?
Sure. Yeah, definitely. So basically, if the overview effect is the psychological effect, if you will, or the overall encompassing effect of what happens when an astronaut or a person in space, which is by definition an astronaut, would see the Earth from that vantage point. So imagine if you really get out there to the International Space Station or the moon and then look back on Earth. So I wrote a piece about this, and there's basically four, main factors of this that I wanted to kind of like push forth, and that's the void. And so when you look at this, you look out, and there's not stars in the main kind of background. It's the Earth is kind of just hanging in a void. It's very I guess you could say it's just hanging. Sorry, it's hanging there just by itself. That's one of the main things you get from it. The second is that the fragile atmosphere. So basically, if you look at the atmosphere, it's very, very thin, and so that is the only thing that is between us and basically the death of space.
Hmm.
And then also third is that there's no like borders. A lot of nation states are a very recent phenomenon in the 18th century, 19th century really getting going. And so you don't really see geographic borders, but you don't see geographic barriers, but you don't see borders. And then fourth, it's like basically when these astronauts come down, they have a unique connection with the Earth. So that means everyone and everything on it. So those four things are really this like monumental, break in the psyche of anyone that's gone up there. And so I thought that was a very, revelatory thing for a lot of different reasons, not just for the person that's experiencing it. One of the astronauts said that the best thing we could do is take all the politicians up there and say, look at this, you son of a bitch. I think Mitchell was his name. But the biggest thing I think I want to take from this is through the documentary, The Overview or Planetary. One of the philosophers had a very good point that basically stuck with me, is that this is the first time that when we saw the Earth, is that the Earth saw itself. So now we are really, as a species, as a planetary organism, whatever you want to call it, have awoken up. Because basically since the 60s, that was not possible other than theoretically. We didn't really get satellites up there to then show us that, hey, we actually, this is what it looks like, et cetera. We could only posit. So the overview effect is a very powerful thing that I think individually is a unique kind of way to reassess how personally you would feel about the Earth and the world and the systems and the processes that we talked about. But then even more so, I think it's more for as a society and a planetary civilization at the highest of levels, is that a lot of people, when they look at the overview effect, they think it's looking out. We're in the stars and looking out. No, that is that we can never get beyond our observable, kind of bubble, because if science is correct right now, the universe is expanding and it's increasingly expanding. So we will never get beyond, what is exactly in our influence already by the definition of the space around us increasing. So we already know that. And so we should basically look away to then inwards, because it can only, like Mars, Venus, the solar system, going to Alpha Centauri, all very interesting. But the real interesting thing is the fact that we got up there and technologically possible to then completely look back in on ourselves individually, but then societally about where we want to go. What do we want to do? Because I think that's the biggest lesson out of all of this, is that we are capable of the techno futures that are in our future. We are capable of the good ones. We're capable of the worst ones. We're capable of the middle ones that are more bureaucratic. We're capable of all these. But to really start, I guess being an agent and having some agency in the world and during this Anthropocene, then the overview effect is an interesting heuristic that I think can ground us rather than continue to looking out into the stars and everything. I think that is something that can look out, but then it grounds us in our earthly being. So I know that was very long-winded, but I hope that was at least touched on most of the points.
Yeah, definitely. Well, so one of the interesting things that that you brought up there was that the sort of different ways of thinking that this change in perspective can have on people, right? You said that it really influences these astronauts when they come back down to Earth. They value the Earth a lot more. They value their communities a lot more now that they've spent this time away. But also there's a sense in which all of the petty problems and squabbles and fights that we're having on Earth don't seem to be quite as important when you're all the way up there.
Absolutely.
And I think those highlight some of the positives of it. Well, for most of us, it's a mental exercise, right? We
yes,
not yet can go up
not
there.
yet. I hope, Alex, we're going to be up there soon.
But one of the things I wanted to talk about a little bit, though, is that there is a sort of a negative aspect to change, shift in perspective, which is that when you get that far removed, that can have a tendency to abstract away a lot of the real concerns that you might otherwise have. And so it's very easy to paint, I would say, a rosy picture about, okay, well, let's just have a borderless world, let's just get over our problems and all work together, yada, yada. But I think one of the hard things is that, there is this reality of towns, of cities, of communities, of cultures, of countries that we live in, and that have their own concerns and issues, and all of us have our own lives that we have to worry about as well. Yeah. And those can't just be abstracted away by an appeal to some sort of universal idea. Oh, we are all on this, on this earth together, and therefore we should just get over ourselves. What do you think about that critique, that it's really just a way to kind of feed people this really abstract narrative that's actually in some ways the opposite of groundedness? Because really, the everyday experience of our lives is contextual, right? We're all situated in a particular place with a particular life history and particular situation. And so I worry because sometimes these very universalizing narratives can escape, be a distraction from solving real problems, and actually serve to feed people narratives that are not necessarily in their best interest. What do you say to that?
Right. No, I think it's a fair criticism, to be honest. I think it's honestly like when you think at that level of, we're talking about planetary level. I think that also we're at the bleeding edge. So I think that's also when we talk about this in our language, we're also talking about the scales. So one of the things that I think coming out of this overview effect is more of this thing of two things. Is I wrote another essay. It took me about a year of doing this because that was my first essay, the overview effect. And then by essay 11, I did an essay called Updated Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth. And Buckminster Fuller being one of my biggest influences, he wrote a book in the 60s called Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth. And it kind of is that same thing that you abstract this whole deal out to and then give this book for everyone to go by. And the updated operating manual is more of an inverted of that. It would be thousands upon thousands of communities kind of coming up, and it's really to what scale are we talking about? And I think cosmo-localism is kind of maybe the through point that goes from the top of the scale all the way down to what you were talking about, the grounding. Because if these aren't linked, then you don't really have that grounding. You just have some abstract thing in the clouds, as they say, some great idea that's very great in theory, but then no actuality. I think one of the things with the overview effect specifically is that I think it also can. Well, let's back up a little bit, because like for me, I'm not necessarily saying that as we kind of started going down that everyone needs to experience this. I at once thought that because I wanted everyone to do that. You know what I mean? I was all rah, everyone get in the space. And then honestly, if we're all being completely honest, I still have a stretch life goal of, making a moon base that is all about culture and like celebrating, humanity's greatness and all this other jazz. But regardless of all that, it's really like, how do we ground ourselves in the policies of that? And I think one of the things is the language that we speak of and the scaling of that. When we do that, it's very, very easy, as you said, to abstract all this stuff away. But I think one of the things that we need to do to link it is to show how that makes sense. And I think one of the ways that makes sense is at the top level is like awe. You know what I mean? Like it's not necessarily like a specific thing of like you need to do X, right? Like it's not a prescriptive kind of thing. It's more of a like you said, a changing of perspective, and it more is going to be for the people who almost are so inclined to be entrenched in that. And it's more of a yeah, and then we can talk about this later. You know, I wrote an ebook. The name of the ebook that I published is "Tripping Over the Truth," and we can kind of get into that. But that's kind of the idea: is that yes, I don't want this to be an abstraction all the way to where, you know, it becomes the antithesis of what I want it to be, and you don't become grounded in everything. But I think one of the ways we do that is in language and talking about scale, and then also being very, very honest about like what it is that we're doing. And I think one of the biggest things is not some prescriptive thing. I think it starts with awe, and maybe not the frontiers, you know, kind of mentality of colonialism or conquest or whatever, but more the ingenuity and the togetherness of the human species of like, holy shit, like we're here talking together over, you know, computerized landlines that are going around the world, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's more along the lines. But yeah, I get that critique, and that's going to be one of the biggest things that, you know, proponents of it are going to have to, you know, be ready for to speak on.